By far, the most common question I've been asked on this Celsior restoration project is where I bought all of the OEM parts. And luckily for you, along the way, I made a detailed spreadsheet. So I'm gonna share that with you, kind of go through some of the things that you need to pay attention to, where I found it, all the different challenges and things you're gonna come across. And then hopefully you can use this to restore your Celsior or LS400 as well. So first of all, the link to this spreadsheet is in the description of this video, and in that, you'll see that I have a detailed breakdown of the component, its name, the part number, the position on the car, and the price that I paid for it at that time. Then there's also a tab in there that you can see that says source, and that's where I got it from. So in the case of the entire front suspension, every single component, you know, all the ball joints and lateral arms and sway bar links and all those kinds of things, I got them from a website called amayama.com. And that is a really great website that connects you to warehouses in Japan. The way that you order from them is a little bit wonky. So essentially you add all of the things to your cart, you check out, and then what happens is behind the scenes, they're gonna go actually talk to their suppliers and figure out what's available. And then they're gonna come back to you and say, here's what we have. Anything they don't have, they are going to refund you immediately. And then they're gonna give you an actual shipping quote for everything that they do have. So you kind of pay up front, they do the work on the back end, and then you just sort of get adjusted accordingly. Each time that I did it, I paid once it was about 150 in shipping was the quote. They came back and said it was 120. So I think that they way overestimate on the shipping, of course, because I'd rather them overestimate than come back and tell me they need more money. Then of course, all that stuff ships straight to you from Japan. In my case, everything came from Japan. It can also come from the UAE as well. And then that took about 2 weeks here in the US. The catch being, of course, you are responsible for the customs fees. In total, both times, I had 2 different shipments come from Amayama, and the FedEx bill was like $30 one time and like $15 the next. So the customs fees aren't that high, but you do have to pay those, and you'll get a bill directly from FedEx. So like I said, the entire front suspension, all those components came from Amayama. They also have a fantastic parts catalog, so you can go look at all of the components and kind of the schematics of the suspension, see everything you need, and kind of cross-reference these part numbers. So keep in mind that my spreadsheet is going to apply to the 95 to 97 Celsiors and LS400. If you have the pre-95s, those are gonna have some different part numbers, and then 98 to 2000 are fairly similar, with some small differences here and there, like alternators and stuff like that. Overall, I would definitely recommend Amayama. It was a really pleasant experience. It was seamless, everything was packaged well, and it came really quickly. Now, I bought the OE equivalent shocks, which are the KYB XLGs, and I know those aren't true perfect OEM, but they are close enough for me, for now at least, especially because the all 4 shocks, as you can see in my spreadsheet, was $323 from Rock Auto, whereas one OEM shock from Amayama was like $250, and a lot of times you can't actually ship those from Amayama and the other websites I'll mention later because they have gas, they're kind of like an explosive, so they're not typically allowed to be shipped via FedEx and stuff, especially because all that stuff from FedEx comes in the air, on a plane. You can't put those on a plane. So the realistic cost of OEM shocks from the dealer was hundreds and hundreds per corner, and I mean, maybe one day I would do that, but certainly not anytime in the future. You'll also see that in the middle section where I talked about suspension miscellaneous, you can see I had to get quite a few different things from a variety of sources. So when it comes to everything to do with the shock, so the actual, strut assembly itself, then the springs, the top hats, and the spring bellows, basically all of those came from a different source. So you can see shocks, I got Rock Auto, front and rear bellows, I got from a website called partsouq.com. I'm not sure that's actually how you say it, Partsouq. But that is another kind of like wholesale website that has tons of OEM components. They also ship from the UAE, and their stuff comes really quickly. I would order on a Thursday and have it by like Tuesday or Wednesday the following week. So although the part is shipping from the Middle East, it comes really quickly, and their prices were typically fairly good. So when I was looking for these OEM components, the first 2 places I would always check are PartsOUQ and Amayama. I would start there, even understanding that there's going to be additional shipping costs, but more often than not, those components from those websites, even including shipping, were less than the dealer by quite a margin. There are some cases where that wasn't true, like the transmission mount that I did on this car, one of the first videos and one of the most dramatic changes on this car. that actually was pretty much the exact same price from the dealer as it was from Parts OUQ, so I ended up just getting it from the dealer because it got here way faster. And then you can see in this suspension miscellaneous section, I said on the like rear spring insulators that I could only get one from Parts OUQ and then one I had to get from the dealer. When I last checked, they had like 3 or 4 of those in stock, so stock is going to come and go. If you really want to save money, just be patient and kind of order when stuff is available. But you know, I kind of batch things together to try to save on shipping. Then of course you can see for the front strut mounts, I actually had to get the front ones from Advance Auto, and those ended up being as fine for now as far as I can tell. And then the rear ones I got from Amazon. So I'll put a link to those in the spreadsheet as well. So moving on to the rear suspension section, this is where things got really complicated. So I went back and did a second order with Amayama, and I added every single rear suspension component that's listed here in my cart on Amayama, and you can see that out of everything, only 3 of those components actually ended up coming from them. So this was a case where they charged me, you know, like I don't remember exactly, $900 or something. They came back and said, hey, we only have 3 of these, so it's actually going to be like, you know, $200 plus shipping. So they just refunded me the whole difference. It went right back on my credit card, no problem. But that became challenging because finding the remainder of these rear suspension components was surprisingly difficult. It took me a very long time to piece all this stuff together, and I also had to pay more from, you know, certain websites. So here we have a couple of new entrants to the suppliers list. So the rear upper control arms I had to get from Lexus Parts Now. Those were not available on Amayama or on Parts OUQ. Lexus Parts Now is some kind of like weird conglomerate. They're a bunch of different websites. You'll find them like Ford, Parts Giant, and a bunch of other brands all kind of use the same thing, and they're all owned by some large parts distributor. So I don't know if they have dealer sources or if they are a dealer themselves and they've just kind of branded a couple of websites out. Overall, I'm not particularly thrilled with Lexus Parts Now. The reason is I did 2 different orders with them. The first batch was these rear suspension components, so the upper control arms and then the rear sway bar bushing. And then I did a second order later when I had all the alternator problems, and we'll get to that in a little bit, and that was kind of a disaster and turned me off of Lexus Parts Now. Then of course I had a couple of components again from Amayama, like I said, and then you'll see a couple of entrants here from eBay actually. So I did manage to find a couple of sellers that were based in Japan that were offering the OEM components. A few of those on the rear ended up being from eBay, and they came perfectly fine. They were people listed in Japan. The tracking number, you know, showed up from Japan. They look exactly like the rear OEM components that I was expecting. So overall, I'm really happy with them. Then you'll notice a couple of other things here in the bushing section. So you'll know if you watched the rear suspension overhaul video that a couple of the bushings in the rear end are just simply not available. They don't make them. They actually were never made separately, but you can get them if you buy the whole rear knuckle, which was like $300 and just not even a consideration of mine. So the only way that you can go about that now is those rear knuckle bushings are polyurethane. They're from a company called Problem Solving Bushings, and they're linked right here in the spreadsheet. And then there is one other rear knuckle bushing as well that you're not going to be able to find OEM, that they just aren't made anymore. They're not available anywhere. And believe me, I searched high and low. The company that makes them is, I'm sure, just an aftermarket kind of like Chinese product from a company called Feebest. It works, it's fine. It's a spherical ball joint kind of bushing like the OEM one, so it's at least as close to OEM as you can get, and they're very affordable. So worst case, you know, if you had to replace it in 2 years, it was $35, not that big of a deal. Although, again, if you watch the video, you know it was incredibly difficult to swap them, so doing it again would not be ideal. But what are you gonna do? Leave the old trash bushing in there or get the $35 aftermarket one and send it? And then again, the last couple of things on there are Amayama and Lexus Parts Now. So let's move towards the bottom of the spreadsheet, and I categorized this section as engine. So of course I did the valve cover gaskets because those were leaking and actually killed my alternator. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff here related to the valve cover gasket job. We have the gaskets, the Toyota FIPG, which is fantastic gasket maker. I'm basically gonna be using that anytime I need gasket maker now on any car. Put the link to that to Amazon here as well. I highly recommend you grab a tube. It's just a fantastic thing to have around. Then of course there's all the other things that I covered in the valve cover video, like the spark plug tube gaskets, the new bolts with the grommets, PCV valve, and all that stuff. Basically all of those OEM components came from Parts OUQ, except for the Toyota FIPG, which came from Amazon. Then of course, you probably recall the motor mount video. I did that many months ago now, and those came from Parts OUQ. The motor mounts made a huge difference along with the transmission mounts, and again, I got the transmission mount from my dealer. And then the last saga, and the reason why I got turned off of Lexus Parts Now, is I ordered the alternator, the plug, the extra bolt, and the nut along with those. And when I got the box, it was completely mangled. The bolt had fallen out, and they basically just were like, so, oh, and also I had a little rubber grommet that I was going to put on the power steering pump, but those didn't show up. They must have fallen out of the box because they were mangled. When I reached out to them and said, hey, some things are missing, they asked, do you want a refund or replacement? And I said, I want a replacement, so please just ship them. Can you ship them overnight? And they said, yeah, no problem. Then the next day I get an email that says, your order has been refunded. I was like, what? So I go back to them and they were like, yeah, we issued you a refund. I was like, that's not what I asked for. So then I ordered them from the dealer because they ended up being basically the exact same price. Then, of course, you need to return the core for the alternator, and the core charge was $75, so I wanted that back. I mail back the core, don't hear anything for 2 weeks, then I email them, and wow, magically, the core charge shows up. Who would have thought? Seems like had I not reached out, the core charge would have never shown up. So it really turned me off using them. They will basically be my absolute last resort, even probably below the dealer, just because the frustration of dealing with them was very, very high. That's where I mentioned it's part of that conglomerate, and I just assume they're probably overseas, support reps and just too much volume. They don't really care. Then the last couple of items on the list were the belt tensioner and the OE idler pulley. Those both came from Amazon. And of course, there's links there if you want to go check those out as well. You'll notice on here, I also got the Lexus LS400 alternator, which is a direct drop in here. I actually haven't upgraded the wiring. I know that's a recommended upgrade, but I've done over 1,000 kilometers now and everything is fine. I'm going to do it here shortly. Overall, I am immensely happy with this. So all in, I've spent about $3,300 in suspension components and, just overhauling all the stuff that you've seen me do here on the channel. This car is incredible. I love driving it. It's such a pleasure to drive. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it has so much power, more than enough for anything you'd need in daily driving, and I take it everywhere now. The only thing that I still have a problem with is the headlights are insanely weak, so that's the next thing for me to deal with, and then eventually at some point in the future, we're gonna be doing the whole timing belt and all of that job, which is gonna take this car out of commission. So I wanna get the truck back on the road before I do that, and you can check out that series here on the channel as well. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. I really appreciate it. And also, as always, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, drop them in the comments and I'll be sure to reply. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.